The Codec Conversation.
So if you heard our last episode, episode 44, we concluded with something that works around, from lightning to sun, which is kind of the gap between part 2 and part 4, in which Snake and Raiden team up to find Sunny. But this week, we're trying to wrap our heads around what else we can think about. And we couldn't think of a full-fledged game.
Yeah.
But you let us know if it could be a possible handheld game or a cheaper game. And this one is surrounded around, we decided to call it The Man Named Fox. And we wanted to kind of talk about what a DLC consisting of Gray Fox would look like. So we know in the story of Gray Fox that he was rescued by the boss several times. One as a child, and then he's a kind of like a young adult in Portable Ops. This given the premise that, what Big Boss said. He said he knew the child and, what they did to him was horrible. But then we never hear from him again until part 1, which is kind of like, okay, so what's the story between that? Why is he so loyal to the boss? And, their story between him and Solid Snake. So there's a little, Heido and I were talking about this, and there's a little inconsistency with the story.
Yeah.
Now, follow us on this one.
Which is going to be hard to work on if we're trying to do these canon games.
Right.
Yeah.
So follow us. And Kojima, if you're listening, we'd like you to answer this. So here's the thing. Here's the premise. So we believe, right, that Solid Snake was not trained by the original Big Boss, but rather Venom. Why? Because of the premise of Metal Gear 2, Solid Snake. You're speaking with Miller, and in part 1, he knows who Miller is and has trained with Miller. And if you remember the part, the end of part 5, Miller is not a fan of Big Boss because he finds out Venom is not the real Big Boss.
Right.
And instead of wanting to team up with the real Big Boss, he says he's going to train his children to go against him. So what makes it confusing is because Gray Fox, we know he's stuck with the original Big Boss, given the premise that he's known him all this time. But if that were true, how could he have trained with Solid Snake, given that Miller didn't want anything to do with the real Big Boss?
Yeah.
And of course, Ocelot must have left sometime in that timeline. So I'm trying to think of how does this all make sense at all? And it doesn't. And in my opinion, you let us know at underthecardboardbox@gmail.com. Heido, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, we were talking about that before, and the cohesion between... I think the problem here is Miller, right? Miller's, I guess, defiance towards Big Boss, but also the relationship between Solid Snake and Gray Fox. How are they so good friends, as they mentioned in part 1? How are they such good friends if logistically they weren't supposed to meet, or train together at least? Because the only logical sense that they will know each other or something is because they trained with each other, right? That would be the only logical sense, just going back into the story. So a little bit, we were talking, and there's a little bit of a loophole on that where it's like, okay, so how can they,
Right.
Maybe Gray Fox knows both Venom and Big Boss. Maybe.
Possibly.
But we definitely don't know. We really don't know.
Right.
We just want to surround this game, though, about Gray Fox, knowing the premise of this little loophole, which is kind of important to know because it can kind of set the rest of the history of it. So,
and it could be a chance for them to correct it.
Yeah.
Let us know. Maybe Miller left Mother Base for whatever reason, and then that's when they joined together. But then, there being two big bosses and stuff like that, was Snake really that confused to not notice that, one big boss was different than the other? Of course, this given the idea that Venom still had the shrapnel in his head.
Yeah.
And the scars on his face. So you can kind of tell the difference.
Right.
So here we go. Metal Gear Solid, the man called Fox, right? He is the only man in the canon, of course, because there are plenty of soldiers in Metal Gear Solid 5. If you Fulton them, some of them are called Fox.
Yeah.
But he is the only man given the code name Fox, and he was literally, like, other than Venom, Big Boss's best soldier, or most trusted soldier, is what they say. So there has to be a build-up. Now, this DLC could possibly exist for Metal Gear Solid 5. I would enjoy it. Like, if they say, here's a $20 DLC, The Man Called Fox, and it would be like a story breaking down, Gray Fox's story with the engine and stuff like that, it'd be pretty cool, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And it can be done, Konami. It can be done. So we've got Gray Fox and this amazing story about him and this tragedy. Like, there's so much that can be poured into this based upon what he said. For instance, he met Naomi on the battlefield when he killed her parents.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So what does it look
that would
like?
be an excellent, like, just scenery story kind
like,
of thing.
What does it mean to take care of this little girl now? Will it be like she takes her back to Mother Base or whatever the case may be, and he comes and sees her from time to time, and the scenes that happen?
Yeah.
Like, so instead of a love interest with Gray Fox, which I don't think he had, maybe it's more like
father-daughter kind of thing?
Well, brother-sister. It was how Naomi
put it.
Gotcha. Right?
Meaning they probably weren't far apart in age.
No, he was much older.
How old?
She made it. Well, she was like maybe 9 or 8 when he found her. So he was around 20 and change.
Gotcha. Okay.
So he was older than her. But he decided to take care of her, and he never told her he killed her parents. And she found out. She'd never found out, actually. Because remember at the end of part 1, before he died, he said, tell her that it was me. Tell her I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And Snake never told her. He said he wanted me to tell you something. He loved you a lot. And, so he never really told.
Lied,
he lied to her to spare her feelings. And just based on that and the relationship with Big Boss and maybe how they trained and just you following Big Boss into battle probably, or following his orders. Can you imagine playing as Gray Fox, and through the codec, all you hear, or the radio, you hear like Big Boss's voice giving you orders?
Yeah. Or like the codec conversations would be between him and Big Boss, 2 screens, kind of, make it different like they did in every game, but kind of like, it's between him, like,
right,
hey,
right.
I'm here,
What made him his most loyal soldier? What made him?
Yeah.
There's story to this. There's substance to it. Also how the training with Snake would fit into such a thing.
Yeah.
That development. Like, maybe you don't even get to play as Solid Snake. Like, if you notice, we're talking about games that kind of like fit in and fill in the blanks and make sense and stuff like that.
There's a timeline between these things, but there's also gaps between them. So you have to look at the encyclopedia on Metal Gear Solid 4 to really see those gaps. Obviously, we know a lot more of those gaps because of 5, but you have to see the gaps between like part 1. And there's a bunch of gaps between the Nintendo ones, part 1, all the way to Metal Gear Solid, right? There's a lot of gap between that there could be a story. And it's funny because I think the way that Hideo Kojima had it in his head to do it is Raiden is like another development of Gray Fox. He's kind of like that other, another super soldier, and he has influences from obviously Olga and, being another Gray Fox looking whatever and stuff, and it's like developing on that. Like Big Boss trained Gray Fox and Solid Snake semi-trained Raiden, introducing him to this, so it's kind of like, man, was maybe Hideo Kojima giving us that answer a long time ago in part 2, where he was just like, hey, this is the next Gray Fox. This is like kind of like the hybrid version of him.
Well, we know Kojima loves nostalgia.
Yeah.
So he repeats things over and over again. So kind of like Gray Fox was with Big Boss, Raiden was with Solid Snake.
Yeah.
And that would be like his,
protege kind of thing.
Yeah, kind of a deal. And Solid Snake never really trained Raiden in that sense.
No.
But Raiden was trained to be the next Solid Snake. He did all the simulations and stuff like that. But back to Gray Fox. Gray Fox has a very sad story. One in which, we know
how it ends.
Yeah, we know how it ends. But you know how they say it's not it's not the destination, it's the journey.
Yeah.
That's kind of like where we want to get. So, I mean, that's our idea. We'd love to know more details of what you guys think, how this would work. The man called Fox, what would be implemented. Maybe it could be more than a DLC. You let us know at underthecardboardbox@gmail.com or at U.C.B. Podcast. Follow us there on Twitter, and we'd love to share ideas and kind of bring them up. So you guys can catch the Codec Conversation here on our YouTube page. Please feel free to subscribe for more Metal Gear content, or you can actually find our stuff, the full episode, in any of your podcast services. So we'll catch you on the next one.